Be brave. Mother Nature is all the time.
First off, right plant, right place.
Plant lots of trees because there's nothing like shade in the garden for creating a really resilient planting scheme.
There are lots of plants in this garden that have different smells. That really kind of supports a sort of sense of grounding in a garden.
First tip I would say is to create a strong structure.
No matter who you are in the UK, you can have a similar garden to this.
I think it's a great way to trying to make the garden more sustainable. Going to reclamation yards and picking materials that have already had a life and giving them a new lease of life.
So my top 3 tips for adding colour to your garden are, first of all, be brave. Mother Nature is all the time, so have a close look at your favourite plant. It might be a verbascum, it might be an iris, it might be a cosmos, and you will perhaps see that there are a whole host of different colour variations within that flower. An easy tip is to just take those different colour variations and then add them in a different coloured plant. So for example, I'm looking here at an Iris Kent Pride. I can see that it has a gorgeous rusty petal. In amongst it, it's got cream and it's got an orange fall. So there we have it. The next plant I need to use is a cool, calm cream and a vibrant orange. I've already got a planting combination which is filled with colour. So my next tip is to use bulbs. They are the secret army of us colourists. So hidden way below ground, you can pop them through from spring right until the autumn, and you'll get these electric fireworks of bloom and colour in any shade that's imaginable. Last tip, tons of annuals, most of which you can just chuck around the garden. Calendula, sherbet fizz there, I use that all around my garden and literally it goes with anything.
So top 3 tips for Waterwise Gardening. First off, right plant, right place. In this garden here, you can see we've got dry plants up in the higher areas, going down to low plants in wet depressions. So really thinking about where you're putting your plants, the conditions they're going to be in, that's really important to consider in order to design a resilient and water-wise planting scheme. Another really important thing is harvesting rainwater. That could be as simple as a water butt, disconnecting your rainwater downpipes. And you could also think about how to channel water in your garden in streams or swales or ponds. So think about where the water is going and how you utilise, how you capture it. And a final tip, I think about permeable materials. So in this garden, all of the walkways are permeable. Water can pass through. The gravel channels in this paving here allows water to percolate into the soil, stops runoff into our main system.
Top 3 tips for making your garden more resilient are, number 1, make areas of planting that are resilient to drought. We've used crevice style planting in the garden where we've used alpines and succulents that will grow their roots down deep in between rock that we've placed on its side so that they can cope with very dry conditions. Number 2, create areas in your garden where moisture-loving plants can grow. So look for depressions where water can be collected during very wet periods of the year. And number 3, plant lots of trees because there's nothing like shade in the garden for creating a really resilient planting scheme.
So top tips for a sensory garden. I think number 1 would be anything that makes you want to reach out and touch it. And that's not necessarily like something that's soft. It could be something that's really spiky. It just makes you go, oh, what does that feel like to touch? And then from that, you might get the smell. With pine, you're going to get that lovely oily fragrance that comes from the pine trees. There are lots of plants in this garden that have different smells. As you come through the garden, you'll feel that kind of fragrance, and that's really kind of supports a sort of sense of grounding in a garden, which was really important to this garden. We've got colour as well. And colour's been an incredible, iconic element of the garden, but in a way that it moves you through the garden. So it was really important to me that that you were kind of had this safe wayfinding, that you were kind of orientated well in the garden. So you might see like purple out of your right hand side and then see it in the distance on your left, and that would move you through the garden. And that was really inspired by a friend of mine who had a stroke and was left partially sighted. So you're thinking like colour would have a sort of sensory effect as well as texture and smell.
People often worry about planting in the shade, planting in woodland gardens, but there's a fantastic amount that you can do in these sort of conditions. And it's my favourite type of planting is woodland planting, which is what we've done here. I think the first tip I would say is to create a strong structure. So here we've got these yew hedges as a backdrop, and that's a fantastic background for planting in front of, particularly with these sort of white plants like the foxgloves, like the cow parsley here. Fantastic backdrop for what we're planting in front. Structure can also be specimen shrubs. We have a wonderful Cornus kousa, which creates a sort of pivot for the garden and a focal point with other planting underneath. So actually creating that dappled shade with structural plants and shrubs, really important. Planting for woodland conditions, for dappled shade, tends to be a little bit less colourful, but my second tip would be that you can do an awful lot with leaf colour, with texture. There's so many different greens that you can combine in different ways to create a kind of lush, immersive space. So thinking about greens as colours in their own right. Thirdly, using leaf texture, so playing with bigger leaves, more sort of jungly textures, vertical, more grassy forms, smaller leaf texture and character. And actually leaves have a lot of colour in them as well. You've got sort of red veining and stems to leaves that actually can bring a lot of colour to a garden like this. And then thirdly, once you've created that structure, used your leaf texture on top of that, introduce little pops of colour. We've used quite a lot of white in here, and that shines out in a dark sort of woodland setting. But there are lots of other plants like these geraniums and astrantias, brunnera, which create little pops of colour that draw your eye through the woodland garden, and grasses as well that can just sort of shimmer in the background. All complete that sort of the picture that we're trying to create.
So our top 3 tips for balconies would be, the first thing is to consider weight. So we have this really lightweight bag which we've used from a company called Backsack, and this allows you to reduce your overall weight on the balcony, but also it means you can lift them around when you want to maintain the garden, and that's really important if you're trying to access certain corners around the garden.
And our second tip would be using the airspace either side of the balcony railings. So you can see with these Dicksonia antarctica, we've deliberately allowed them to overflow into this free airspace to use up more space than actually the footprint of the balcony allows.
Our other tip is that jungle gardens are accessible to everyone. Now, a Dicksonia antarctica is probably on the higher end of expensive plants. You can get a packet of seeds to do a nasturtium, or we have a hart's tongue fern which is available all over Britain, or a Fatsia japonica. So we've done quite a different range of plants that mean that no matter who you are in the UK, you can have a similar garden to this.
My top 3 tips for the garden would be, first, trying to find the right plants for the right places. So choosing the planting palette that responds to the site conditions, such as the soil and light levels. The second tip would be using reclaimed materials. In this garden, I have 120-year-old clay pavers, and I think it's a great way to trying to make the garden more sustainable. Going to reclamation yards and picking materials that have already had a life and giving them a new lease of life instead of using new stone. And my third tip would be trying to use timber for furniture. And in this garden, we used pieces of timber that have naturally come to the end of their lifespan, such as a huge ash bench. So just trying again to use materials that are sustainable and natural and have long lifespan.